Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. Recently I was doing my personal scripture study and I was in section 111 of Doctrine and Covenants. And this was a section that really touched me on a personal level because of things happening in my life right now. But this is an unusual section for a couple of reasons, and it led me to something that I never knew about Joseph Smith and something that he said about a prophecy that's been fulfilled. And there are implications for today as far as signs of the times that we're seeing. This is really, really interesting. I say so many times that I felt like I knew so much before starting this channel, being a lifelong member of the church. And after going through this process, I'm just fascinated by how much I didn't know. And I'll be curious to see if you guys knew about this before this video. Let me know in the comments below. But we'll start with this. We're going to read the section heading, Revelation given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Salem, Massachusetts. And by the way, this is the only revelation that was received in this location, so this makes it stand out. August 6th, 1836. At this time, the church and its leaders were heavily in debt due to the construction of the Kirtland Temple and persecutions in Missouri. Hearing that a large amount of money might be available to them in Salem, the prophet, Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith, and Oliver Cowdery traveled there from Kirtland, Ohio to investigate this claim, along with preaching the gospel. The brethren transacted several items of church business and did some preaching. When it became apparent that no money was to be forthcoming, they returned to Kirtland. Now, there's an interesting verse 9, that says this: "This place you may obtain by hire, and inquire diligently concerning the more ancient inhabitants and founders of this city." So this is something that the Lord was telling them to do. They're in Salem, Massachusetts, trying to find money for the church, and the Lord commands them to find out more about the ancient inhabitants and founders of this city. I had to know what that was about. Why did the Lord instruct them to do that? So the first thing I did, I went to the Institute Student Manual for these verses, and it says, "In obedience to the Lord's command to inquire diligently concerning the more ancient inhabitants and founders of this city, during their stay in Salem, Massachusetts, the prophet Joseph Smith and his companions traveled throughout Salem and its surrounding areas, visiting museums, historical sites, and libraries." This is such a bizarre concept to me. The prophet Joseph Smith visiting visiting museums and historical sites. Now, there's been plenty of history before Joseph Smith. I'm aware of that. But I'm currently living in a place where I go to all these historical sites that have to do with Joseph Smith. Adam-on-Diamond, Far West, Tinney Grove, the Battle of Crooked River, here in Independence. So that's what I associate with historical sites, is Joseph Smith. So it's bizarre for me to think of him going to historical sites in his day. But this is essentially what the Lord commanded them to do, was to go visit museums, historical sites, and libraries. But that's not the point of this video. It's an interesting concept. And we could probably apply this to ourselves, whether it's church sites or whether it's historical sites in your local area. You should probably think about visiting those sites and remembering our history and the history of your area. Okay. They learned more about the city's founding by the Puritan Pilgrims in the early 1600s and about the American Revolutionary War and the establishment of the United States. Some of the brethren spent time learning about the Salem witch trials. In addition, the prophet Joseph Smith and his companions visited the remains of the Charleston Ursuline convent, which had been destroyed by an anti-Catholic mob motivated by religious intolerance. Referring to this experience, The prophet wrote, quote, "When will man cease to war with man and wrest from him his sacred right of worshiping his God according to his conscience, according as his conscience dictates? Holy Father, hasten the day." Okay, so I looked into it some more, and it led me to the Joe Smith Papers website. This is History of the Church. And while they were in New York, so starting out in Albany, and then later going to Catskill and West Point, and I guess near Rochester or something like that. I don't really know how to read this part right here, but they were in this area. This is what he said. "While here, I visited the Burnt District." I'm going to highlight that. The Burnt District. That part of the city where it was estimated 15 millions of property were consumed by fire on the 16th of December, 1835. According to, now this is the key part right here. This is what this whole video is about, is this next part of the sentence. According to the predictions of the ancient, that there should be fire and vapor of smoke in the last days. The prophet Joseph Smith, the head of this dispensation, the one who translated the gold plates and gave us the Book of Mormon, the one who received most of the revelations in Doctrine and Covenants, he said that fire, and I don't think he's referring just to this one fire by itself, but in talking about this fire that I've never heard of, that fire helped fulfill prophecy regarding fire and vapor of smoke in the last days. I'm highlighting this because one of the recurring themes on my channel is that prophecy plays out many times in ways that we don't expect. We read the scriptures and don't take into account the time that has passed since they were written, or we just don't think about the depth of things. And we assume that everything that we're reading is for our own viewing pleasure. Like if something happened back then in 1835, well, that's not the main thing. That was just whatever. The big show, the big thing that we're waiting for, that's going to happen to me. I'm going to witness it right up, before the second coming. No. This is what signs of the times looks like in fulfillment of prophecy. So where does this come from? Fire and vapor of smoke. I found one instance here in Doctrine and Covenants 45, which is one of the two really big Second Coming sections, starting in verse 39. "And it shall come to pass that he that feareth me shall be looking forth for the great day of the Lord to come, even for the signs of the coming of the Son of Man." So we're talking about signs. Remember, sometimes we confuse, I've noticed, sometimes we confuse signs with prophecies. Sometimes there are very specific prophecies, such as the two witnesses, or the brass plates being translated, receiving the unsealed or receiving the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. Those are specific prophecies. But then you have prophecies of a broader type, a more general type, called signs of the times, which, as we're about to read, could have to do with fire, could have to do with war. And it's not a specific fire necessarily, or a specific war. It's just fires, wars, plagues in general, and especially as they increase in intensity or frequency. Verse 40, "And they shall see signs and wonders, for they shall be shown forth in the heavens above and in the earth beneath." And here it is. Verse 41, "And they shall behold blood and fire and vapors of smoke. And before the day of the Lord shall come, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon turned into blood, and the stars fall from heaven." We're going to focus on verse 42 later on in the video, but I want to click on footnote B in verse 41 for smoke. And let's read some of the other related scriptures. The first one is Genesis 19, verse 28. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. So that's kind of interesting, especially in light of what we're going to look at for the rest of the video. We can think of what happened with Sodom and Gomorrah as we look at other things that have happened recently. 1 Nephi 19:11. Now, this is actually referring to Christ's first coming and the signs that would attend his first coming. For thus spake the prophet, the Lord God surely shall visit all the house of Israel at that day, some with his voice because of their righteousness unto their great joy in salvation, others with thunderings and the lightnings of his power, by tempest, by fire, and by smoke, and vapor of darkness, and by the opening of the earth, and by mountains which shall be carried up. Okay, 3 Nephi chapter 10, verses 13 to 14. And they were spared, and were not sunk and buried up in the earth, and they were not drowned in the depths of the sea, and they were not they were not burned by fire, neither were they fallen upon and crushed to death. And they were not carried away in the whirlwind, neither were they overpowered by the vapor of smoke and of darkness. Of course, this is a foreshadowing of the second coming, but this is what happened to the Nephites when Christ came to them, and this is specifically describing the ones that didn't become victims of all those calamities. And now, whoso readeth, let him understand. He that hath the scriptures, let him search them, and see and behold, if all these deaths and destructions, by fire, and by smoke, and by tempest, and by whirlwinds, and by the opening of the earth to receive them, and all these things are not unto the fulfilling of the prophecies of many of the holy prophets. And then the last one is Mormon chapter 8, verses 29 to 30. Yea, it shall come in a day, then when there shall be heard of fires and tempest and vapors of smoke in foreign lands, and there shall also be heard of wars, rumors of wars, and earthquakes in diverse places. Okay, and those are all the scriptures that I know of. What I've done is I've taken the scriptures that have to do with the second coming and added them to my spreadsheet called Quotes, Prophecy, Fulfillment Tracker. And so I have this one from Doctrine and Covenants 45, and then I have the one from Mormon 8, 29 to 30. They have reference to the second coming and vapors of smoke. And I think it's an ongoing thing. I don't think that it was fulfilled specifically with this fire that Joe Smith was talking about the 16th of December, 1835. But I think that was a partial or ongoing fulfillment of vapors of smoke. But I do think that if you're waiting for something else to happen, like, no, that's not it, there has to be more, I wouldn't go that far. We already have a prophet saying that this has fulfilled the predictions of the ancients, that there should be fire and vapor of smoke. So you could check that off the list. There will probably be more. There definitely have been more since that time. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Now, it makes me think of this. Let's go back to Doctrine and Covenants 45, verse 42. And before the day of the Lord shall come, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon be turned into blood, and the stars fall from heaven. So you might be thinking, surely, we haven't seen that yet. And if you've been watching my channel, the next thing I'm going to show you won't come as a surprise. But back in the October 2001 General Conference, the first talk that was given was a talk by President Hinckley called Living in the Fullness of Times. And this happened a month after that thing that happened in New York in 2001. So I think a lot of people were looking forward to hearing from the prophet. And especially a prophet like President Hinckley, who had done so many things, such as the announcement of all those temples. It was like the first big wave of temple announcements. And it was under his presidency that the conference center was constructed. We got the Living Christ document that was published. There were a lot of things going on with President Hinckley. At that time, I was a teenager, and I was very aware of him and really looking to him as somebody that stood out from his predecessors, especially when thinking about the Second Coming. So this was the first talk of that General Conference, and not too far in the talk, he says, and I think that this has to do with what happened the month before, he says, "The vision of Joel has been fulfilled, wherein the Lord declared, and it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke," which this is essentially the same thing as fire and vapors of smoke. And then the next thing is, "The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and the terrible day of the Lord come." I'm going to end it there. These are highlights from a previous video. So I'm not waiting for that to be fulfilled. I do have some quotes that seem to indicate that there will be like a grand fulfillment of that. For instance, it seems that when Christ comes in his glory, the brightness of his coming is going to drown out the brightness of the sun, and hence the sun shall be turned into darkness. It'll be outshone, for example. So I think that there probably is more fulfillment to this, but again, I'm not necessarily waiting for a singular day where I go outside and the sun is dark and then the moon is all red, unless it's from like a lunar eclipse. Just like a big dramatic day where all this is happening at the same time, the stars falling from the heaven. I think that this is like an ongoing thing. There may be some things that will more fully fulfill it. But all I know is that President Hinckley said, October 2001 General Conference, that the vision of Joel has been fulfilled. Okay. I also think about all these record-breaking wildfires that I have on my spreadsheet that essentially started in 2004. This is the year that President Oaks, at the time, Elder Oaks of the Quorum of the 12, gave his big Second Coming talk, in which he talked about signs of the times, including wildfires. And since that time, you've had all these record-breaking wildfires. There's only a couple that I have from before that time. We've got Wyoming, and then we also have Australia. These are, I think, Australia as a whole. The 1974 to 75 Australian bushfire season. And then for Wyoming, the Yellowstone fires of 1988. And I've searched as much as I possibly could for every, state and territory and country for these three things. Either the largest single wildfire or the largest total wildfire for the entire area, like the entire country. So either the largest, deadliest, or most destructive. If it was one of those three things, then I have it here on my spreadsheet. And they've been increasing, especially since 2017, the year before President Nelson became president of the church. 2018 was a particularly bad year. That's when we had the Paradise, California fire. 2020 was bad. That's when California saw its single largest wildfire as well as its worst wildfire season in state history. And then 2023 was especially bad. 2023 was really, really bad. One of the most notable events was the Canadian wildfire season for the entirety of the country. It led to scenes like this, where Canadian wildfire smoke was coming down into the United States, and it went really far south. But some of the most dramatic scenes were seen in New York City and Washington, D.C., where the sun was darkened by wildfire smoke, and the moon turned into blood at night because the moon would have appeared red, right? This is what it looks like on a graph. If I just do a tally of each one of those events, all the ones that I have on that other spreadsheet, this is what it looks like. There may be some that I'm missing, but I think this is a pretty good overall picture. And then last year, we had something similar where we had Canadian wildfire smoke coming down, at least into the Independence, Missouri area. It started on the first day of Community of Christ 2025 World Conference. They only have their World Conference every 3 years. This was the night that I'm recording right here. This was the night that Stassi D. Cramm was ordained, the first female prophet president of Community of Christ. And the sun's a little bit too low at this point, but if it was a little bit higher in the sky, it would have been like a reddish color because of the Canadian wildfire smoke that was in the sky. And it was like that for probably like a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. More recently, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of vapors of smoke in Gaza. And you could also point to Ukraine and Russia and different conflicts around the world. Back in 1945 in Japan, there were 2 really big vapors of smoke that ended World War II. So the point is, I think it's safe to say that there could be more fulfillment of this, but I think it's pretty well fulfilled, and it's an ongoing fulfillment. But again, the reason why I'm making this video is because Joseph Smith pointed out this relatively obscure fire that I don't know how many people know about it, that happened the 16th of December, 1835. He considered that fulfillment of prophecy or ongoing fulfillment of prophecy, whereas a lot of people would probably just shrug their shoulders and be like, nah, that's not prophecy, that's just a fire. This shows you the difference between the way that signs should be interpreted and the way that a prophet would look at a sign, and people that just think everything is a coincidence and meaningless. So the last thing I want to share is from my spreadsheet called Quotes, Common Misconceptions. This is currently row 37. The topic is signs. The misconception is the signs of the times and the fulfillment of prophecy will be very obvious. Actually, I should correct this and say will always be very obvious, because sometimes it is obvious. It can be obvious, but it's not always obvious. I have a number of quotes to back this up, that's a misconception. My favorite one is this talk by, at the time, Elder George Q. Cannon of the Quorum of the 12. He later became a member of the First Presidency, and his entire discourse was about this. This is in Journal of Discourses, Volume 21, pages 264 to 269. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm going to read one part that I've read a million times on this channel already. So before this, he talked about the fact that Joseph Smith prophesied about the Civil War and how the Civil War came and it went, and it didn't really convince anybody that he was a prophet, even though he was very specific in his prophecy. And George Q. Cannon says, even with this experience in the past, the Latter-day Saints themselves are not entirely divested of extravagant views respecting the effects which are likely to follow the fulfillment of predictions yet in the future. Are we not all inclined to look forward to many events which have been predicted by the servants of God as being of so great and wonderful, and may I say, so supernatural a character, that when they shall be fulfilled, they will even startle us who believe they are coming, and to compel the unbelieving inhabitants of the earth to accept them as evidences of the truth? In our thoughts, this seems to be the natural tendency. I notice it in myself. I notice it in others. When we read respecting the great events which are to take place in connection with this work, as predicted in the book of Doctrine and Covenants, which it's interesting because that's what we're reading from in this video, and Joseph Smith said that something was fulfilled. As predicted in the book of Doctrine and Covenants, are we not inclined to think that surely, when these things shall come to pass, all the earth, as well as ourselves, will be constrained to acknowledge this to be the work of God, and that these events to be indeed those which have been predicted by the prophets? Now, I would not for the world say one word to lessen in the minds of my brethren and sisters the importance of these events. I would not say one word to weaken your proper expectations. But my experience has taught me that the Lord works in the midst of this people by natural means, and that the greatest events that have been spoken of by the holy prophets will come along so naturally as the consequence of certain causes that unless our eyes are enlightened by the Spirit of God and the Spirit of revelation rests us, we will fail to see that these are the events predicted by the holy prophets. I'll end it there, but it's really worth reading that whole discourse. So when we see President Hinckley giving this talk the month after that big event happened in 2001, when we see these crazy record-breaking wildfires that produce scenes like this, which to my mind is pretty obvious just looking at it. Just look at these pictures. This doesn't look apocalyptic to you? When you read a lot of these articles, that the word apocalypse or end days will actually appear in the title of the article or somewhere in the article, because this is exactly how people picture the quote-unquote apocalypse, the end times. And so it happens and we see it, but then we just dismiss it. It's not big enough. It's not grand enough. Nothing happened right after, because I think that's another thing. There's the expectation that it's like, oh, okay, New York City is starting to get dark. That means that Jesus Christ is going to appear tomorrow night. No, we have to have patience. Patience is a virtue. And I think we live in a society, in a culture where our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. It's harder for us to complete reading a book or even watching a full-length movie or even watching an entire YouTube video, according to my analytics, where people are getting more and more addicted to just watching shorts or watching TikTok because we just don't have the attention span. We can't focus on something. That's the purpose of my channel, is to help us look at the big picture. There is a big picture, and it goes back decades. It even goes back hundreds of years, thousands of years. It's according to the Lord's timing. But I will tell you, I feel like I can say this with certainty with so many things, that things are picking up. They're becoming more frequent. They're becoming more intense. Whether it's wildfires or whether it's the church talking about the second coming or any number of things. I can point to a bunch of different things, and I do regularly. It's happening. I promise you it's happening. And it's not just off of my analysis of these things. It's based on what prophets and apostles are currently telling us. So anyway, I just love this quote from Joseph Smith talking about a fire I've never heard of, in saying that this is according to the predictions of the ancients, I think it's supposed to be ancients. According to the predictions of the ancients, that there should be fire and vapor of smoke in the last days. Okay, well that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.